Now, okay, so you have them. Let's say you have them in a high potency, and you've got this body that's been very stressed. How do you put those together to get the signal to work? It turns out that nanoparticles have specifically been found in a number of studies, and this has been written about in several review articles. Nanoparticles are capable of causing hormesis. So now you have potentially a way of synthesizing this mass confusing, seemingly diverse literature that appears to have no connection from one topic to the next. And yet, if you look for something that is more unifying in the way you can understand homeopathy and the remedies and medicines that are made, this becomes a more integrative theory that you can check against. Okay, if a particular theory is valid, then it has to be able to accommodate findings that there are electromagnetic signals. It has to be able to accommodate that there are photons released, that there are optical signals. It has to be able to accommodate studies on provings of homeopathic remedies where multiple people have been given the same remedy at the same time, and not only have they, but even also the people sometimes receiving the placebo have had the symptoms of the remedy during these homeopathic experimental provings. How could this be? Well, people have ascribed that to quantum mechanical effects. Well, do nanoparticles have quantum mechanical effects? Well, indeed they do. It turns out that very, very small nanoparticles, so anything that has a nanometer size could be considered a particle that is a nanoparticle, but nanoparticles below 100 nanometers are the ones of greatest interest from a research point of view and acquire some of these properties I've been talking about. Very, very small nanoparticles that are less than 10 nanometers, which have been found in homeopathic remedies by the group in India, those kind of nanoparticles can be referred to sometimes as what are called quantum dots, and in the nanotechnology literature. And they have the capability of producing quantum entanglement, quantum coherence, and other kinds of phenomena. And so all of a sudden you have something that can, in fact, move comfortably across all of these seemingly diverse observations that have been made about remedies. And if you're getting macro quantum entanglement in homeopathic provings, and you have something, this is a huge leap, and it's argued about in the field of homeopathy, let alone among the skeptics, about whether you're actually getting quantum mechanical effects from the remedies in a macro level. But you have something that's capable of being the information in the body or in the system that might be able to produce some quantum mechanical effects. And that if you have a body there who's capable of amplifying whatever signal it gets or whatever information it receives, then you potentially have a way for all of this to happen. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we've had in this field, of being able to put it all together, because there are certainly people who have done excellent work in one particular aspect, but very few have tried to assemble it all. So we have assembled what we would call the nanoparticle complex adaptive system model for how this all works, which basically draws on all these different literatures and says, yes, hormesis could be involved. Yes, hormesis involves adaptation. Adaptation is what complex adaptive systems do. It's what living systems do. And all they need is something to set them in motion, and they can amplify very small signals into very large effects. So again, I've talked for a while about all of that, but the nanoparticle itself is a structure where things get trapped on the surface because it is so small. So the electrons around the atoms are actually sort of forced into particular configurations which lead in very, very small particles to these quantum mechanical effects that I talked about. And again, I'm more of a neurophysiologist by my PhD training than I am someone who has done the kind of chemistry we're talking about. Most of what I'm talking about is work that I've done in collaboration with people who are experts in nanotechnology and looking at nanoparticles specifically. The information from the remedy is at a very fundamental level being communicated. You will literally read about vibration, a term that's often used by people in the field of homeopathy, when you read about properties of nanoparticles. But we're talking about vibration at a whole other level that may or may not be directly relevant clinically. But it opens out into these very large effects in the complex adaptive system that the body is. So, as you know, in your life, just even psychologically, if someone mentions a word, there's a famous movie, it had Orson Welles in it, and the man was not well understood, but on his deathbed, the one word he said was rosebud, and nobody could figure out what it was all about. Well, it was a sled he had as a kid. That I think is essentially what's going on with the remedy. The remedy is speaking to the large system, which is then capable of producing these amplified effects. So if someone says a word to you that's very meaningful, or a gesture or a particular thing that someone does that's very meaningful to you, it can open up enormous changes in your life. I mean, that happens in psychotherapy and counseling kinds of work. But it's possible that some of the information carried by these remedies does it at somewhat more of a physiological, biological level, if you will, but also has psychological effects that are quite profound. And again, it's because of how we are organized as the system. It can't have the effects if it isn't speaking to you. And I think that fundamental aspect goes back to some of the work that other people have been doing. So yes, you can start with a bulk material, you triturate it, and this is one of the other things I would want to point out. Homeopathic manufacturing is very simple. You grind something in lactose, or you put it into an ethanol water solution and you serially dilute it, but you're not just diluting it. The skeptics only focus on dilution. What's actually very important is the succussion. And after every dilution step, most manufacturers are probably going to use at least 10 succussions, maybe more. Some of them do it mechanically with vortexes. Some of them literally still do it by hand, the way Samuel Hahnemann did, by banging the bottle on a book, or the equivalent of a book, producing severe agitation of the liquid that's in the solution. And when they do that, that kind of agitation has actually been shown to produce nanoparticles. There are forms of clearing out of materials from water supplies when they're cleaning water, where they use very violent, strong water jets to clear the water. And part of what they do is break up any contaminants that are in the water into nanoparticles. That's part of what it does. That has some parallel to a less used form of homeopathic manufacturing, probably, called fluxion. But again, you have to have a theory that's going to accommodate what we know about the field, both in the research literature and in the clinical world. And in the clinical world, when people are manufacturing the remedies, they're grinding them, which is well known in the conventional nanotechnology literature to be a way to make nanoparticles from insoluble materials. Many conventional drugs are not soluble, and there's a vast literature now on just grinding them up to make them smaller so they can become more accessible to the body, both to get into the body and to exert their effects. So we have that, and then if you are succussing, you're agitating, you are potentially breaking down material that is in there. Even if it is larger, you're breaking it down further into small materials. Now, the other thing I did want to mention is there are several other interesting points. When you are succussing something in a container, frequently and classically with Hahnemann, that was glass. That was actually not plastic or some other synthetic material. It turns out that you actually knock components of the glassware off into the solution as well. And a group from the United States actually originally demonstrated this, and it's been replicated several times across the world at this point, that you're actually knocking silica off the glassware walls into the solution. So all of a sudden you not only have whatever the source material was and its nanoparticles being transferred, but now you have silica. Well, what's interesting about silica? It's a semiconductor material. As nanoparticles, silica is very powerful in stimulating the immune system. In fact, it can serve as an adjunctive material. It actually amplifies the effects of ordinary vaccines. It's a carrier. It actually is a fascinating material unto itself. So if you were to bang the parts of what would be called silicates off the glassware wall, those can actually form themselves. They self-assemble. And if you happen to have something in the solution to assemble around, it turns out that silica can do that quite nicely. So you can actually make what might be called a body cast of anything that's in solution. And when silica coats something, it actually stabilizes those particles frequently. It amplifies their effects. This kind of technology is used in things from solar cells to some nanomedicines. Silica is a well-tolerated nanomaterial in the body. And this whole thing about agitation producing the silica has even been independently reported in the pharmacy literature for conventional drugs, where people have been looking at packaging materials and reporting that there are immune effects where the silica particles get knocked off the glassware and combine with whatever drug is in solution. If, for example, you had a protein-containing material as part of a conventional drug, it actually combines with it and will amplify the immune properties of that protein. Well, plants have proteins, animal byproducts have proteins, and so you have to begin thinking about the likelihood that the silica is a big player in all of this. That again is yet again another observation in the literature on homeopathic remedies that needs to be noted. Now, sure, you can bang things around in a plastic tube. You may be able to make homeopathic remedies from the original source material. But my best guess is that if you want the amplification effect, you want to do the manufacturing somewhat the way Hahnemann did it, which is he used actual glassware, and that material itself may be contributing to the final remedy.